Hello everyone and welcome back to Realism Overhaul Sandbox in Kerbal Space Program 1.12. During a recent Twitch live stream, I decided to pursue a very bad idea to make an American version of the UR-700A from the Soviet Union. And it's a bad idea. You can sort of see why with this stage here. We've got 3 Nervas at the bottom of it, and that's just the start. The original UR-700 was the competitor to the N-1 within the Soviet Union to send Soviet cosmonauts to the moon, thereby competing with the American Saturn V, though it didn't win out in the competition and the N-1 was chosen. The UR-700A is the nuclear version proposed by Vladimir Chelomey to increase the payload capacity of the UR-700, and it has a stage with 3 40-ton thrust nuclear engines at the top and then 7 40-ton thrust nuclear engines on the next stage. So we have 3 Nervas for the American version and then 7 Nervas after that, which is roughly equivalent to the RO-31 engines that would have been on the UR-700A. They're a little bit under thrust by comparison. After that, they had a cluster of proton diameter tubes because they wanted to send these bits by rail, and so there's a limit, 4.3 meters. And so we have 3 of these 4.3 meter tubes at the center and then 6 as boosters. For the Soviet version, they would have used RD-270 engines burning UDMH and nitrogen tetroxide. And for the American version, I put F1 engines because we're in the 1960s and I wanted to keep it there. And the boosters feed from top tanks into the core to extend the duration of the core, otherwise the core would run out at the same time or even earlier than the boosters. Now, I had some special problems with the tapered fairing that we see at the base of the 7 Nerva stage, and yeah, that happened. I ultimately fixed that by changing them to pedal fairings. It sort of worked out, but sometimes it still had an issue, even though they aren't really clipping into anything. And off we go. So I tried to launch it. Now, the bottom part is actually longer than the UR-700A version would be. I called this the AR-700A, by the way. And the reason for that is because the F1 engines have more thrust but less efficiency, so we need more fuel. So off go the boosters. They are paired up like that. And then we have the 3 core modules, if you will. It looks a bit weird at this point, but there we are. The troublesome aspect of this is mainly down to the 7 nuclear engine stage that we see lighting here. And of course, this has to get into orbit unless you really want to be mean and to dump it on some random people somewhere or in the ocean. That would be pretty bad too. They are fairly powerful nuclear reactors, and they would still be very active. You know, they might be cooling down, but they're still gonna be sort of hot for a while. So you need to get them to orbit, and we did not get them to orbit there. But I reverted, it's fine. So Delta V, not quite enough. We're trying to carry 100 tons to the moon here is the goal. And the Soviet version, because of more efficient engines, but also because they were just a paper design and were a bit optimistic about certain things, was said to be able to carry 105 to 115 tons to the moon. That's according to RussianSpaceWeb.com. So that's what we're talking about. If you're not sending stuff to the moon, that's not a good idea, because then you're definitely dumping the 7 nuclear engine stage into the ocean, and let's not do that. So yeah, you have to be sending stuff to a high orbit somewhere. Talking about the low Earth orbit capacity of this is a bad idea. So I try with ascent guidance from MechJeb and see how well it can do with the rocket. I haven't made any other changes, still keeping the 100 tons of avgas as our payload. And so here that stage is lit. We see that it's still not going to be able to actually complete orbit with this stage, unfortunately. As much as I tried to make the rocket look like the UR-700A from RussianSpaceWeb.com, I didn't quite get it right because of the fairing issues, as well as the fact that these are just procedural parts. I could make a custom model, but I understand there is already one by Katniss. My dimensions are a little bit different from the Katniss one. The diameter at the top is 12 meters instead of, apparently, I haven't checked this myself, 10.5 meters. Anyway, here I'm adjusting the payload because even MechJeb's ascent guidance couldn't get there. It got maybe 50 meters per second more than I did. And so I'm going with 95 tons and then readjusting the stage there. The third stage really just needs to be able to boost it to the moon, so I'm making sure that the amount of fuel it has in there is just enough for that and no more. And here I'm also changing the apoapsis and periapsis so that they're a little bit different, and also the rate, the pitch rate, so that it turns a little bit faster. At one point it sort of suddenly switched from one pitch to another, and we want that to happen more smoothly. So those were the fixes in order to make sure it had enough delta V, and as it turned out, I had just enough. It's going to be really tight by the end here. But that's just enough to make orbit with the 7-Nerva stage, and not necessarily to get to the moon. And the issue there is that we have enough delta V to get to the moon, but the way we plot that is not accurate because it assumes an instantaneous burn. If we had something like the system in Principia, it would probably work out a little bit better. So here, starting up the 7-Nerva stage. Again, this is a horrible idea. You should never have 2 nuclear stages. It's just not, it's not a good idea. But yeah, I was just curious. And it turns out that we don't have enough delta V because of that inaccurate plotting. And I ultimately figured that it could carry 92 tons. We're using very standard tanks. These are just aluminum gridded tanks, so no special tanks. They're relatively heavy and they could be lighter. And I'm using the F1As, not just the F1 engines, so they have more thrust than the F1s and better ISP, but nothing compared to the RD-270s that they're taking the place of on the Soviet rocket. So as this gets started, it won't quite make it, and I decide that we're trying to carry 95 tons here. I decide that 92 tons is the right amount for this. But there is an upgraded version that we could try, a more modern version if I so choose, and that would have Timberwind engines at the top and the next stage, and then at the bottom clusters of Raptor engines or clusters of BE-4s. That's the other alternative, and that will get more performance than the UR-700A. So anyway, with that little experiment, I'll say thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please do press like. If you have any comments or suggestions, please leave them in the comment section below, and I'll see you next time.